This webinar has been live streamed.
हो रहा है सर, अभी तक हुआ नहीं।
हाँ नहीं, आराम से। कोई एक मोना जैन आया।
आसान नहीं है संतुलन साधना,
पर हमला किया गया।
धार के साथ संभल कर चलना। आसान नहीं है आग जले पर कुछ राख ना हो, तेज नजर रहे नजरिया साफ
का काम किया है सरकार ने।
आसान नहीं है खबरों की डगर, 9 साल से जारी है और रहेगा खबरों का सफर। न्यूज नेशन, एजेंडा नहीं सिर्फ खबर।
This is Nehal Shukla, your host for the afternoon, and I welcome you all to the yet another edition of AdGully's eminent property, Trending Now. Trending Now is AdGully's effort to compile those valuable insights from the industry leaders in a comprehensive edition that will serve as a guidebook as we move ahead, leaving behind those very challenging times. This is a keepsake for these times. Before moving forward, I would like to call upon the virtual stage Bijoya Ghosh, founder and CEO of AdGully. Ma'am, over to you.
Everyone, and a very warm welcome to the launch of the latest edition of our ebook, Trending Now 2022, a definitive compilation of insights, views, strategies, and experiences of industry leaders across sectors. Coming out of the pandemic period, this edition of Trending Now has several lessons in resilience and charting out a successful recovery strategy. But above all, it is about fighting through extremely challenging times, not giving up, innovative, and being empathetic. We call this edition your personal masterclass in handling business disruptions. Before we move on to the launch, we have a very interesting panel discussion on creating advertiser pull for news broadcasters in the post-pandemic times, held by some leading names in India's media planning and buying ecosystem, including an industry veteran who's now heading a mega company based on Indian ethos. The panel is moderated by my colleague and AdGully's editor, Shanta Saikia. Over to you, Shanta.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this special discussion that we have today for you, which concerns the news genre and the advertisers' traction with the genre. The topic that we have today is creating advertiser pull for news broadcasters in the post-pandemic times. And we have a very distinguished panel with us today. We have Anita Nair, COO, Patanjali Ayurved. We have Amol Dighe, CEO, Investments and Business, and Ramsai Panchapakesan, Senior VP, Zenith. So they are seasoned professionals in media planning. Anita today represents the brand side as well. So I'm looking forward to a very rich discussion over here. During the pandemic times, when we saw fresh content drying up in most of the genres, news was a genre that had intense. There was a lot of traction over here. We had increasing viewership over here, people looking for information, people looking for fresh developments, especially during those very challenging years. And this also led to more advertisers coming on to different news channels. And this has led to tremendous traction for this genre. But what is happening in the post-pandemic times? How are the media planning strategies looking at news publishers in this period, especially with the tremendous transition to digital that we saw during this period? So we have a lot of interesting insights that we are expecting in the next 45 minutes or so. So I would like to start with you, Anita, since you bring the perspective both from the media planners as well as the client side. Now, when we revisit news channel positioning, so how news channels now need to reposition themselves, or do they need to reposition themselves, to create a very strong brand offering for advertisers? How is it that news channels can look at creating differentiation? Because there is noise from every corner. There is intense, very cutthroat competition that we see in the news genre space. And as soon as BARC started, presenting the data for news channels again, and we've seen, all the news channels claiming to have the #1 position, in different day parts. And also, how important has it become for news channels to reposition and create that very strong brand differentiation, Anita?
Yeah, so I'll wear the media planner's hat first and answer that question, because not that the perspectives are going to be very different, but they're going to be from different sides. So
Absolutely.
I think as far as media planning has been concerned, I think for various brands, depending on what kind of categories, product categories one is working on, news has been a great genre to to patronize. Whether it is the automobile sector or the real estate sector, not as much as FMCG, and I'll come back to that when I'm talking on behalf of a brand. We've always seen largely male skewed product categories who've patronized news quite a bit. And talking about pre-pandemic, of course, news was where it was, and then came this whole thing about them not getting, the BARC not being very kind to them. And then, of course, pandemic happened, where you never had, you didn't have too much new programming because of obvious reasons on various entertainment genres. And also the reason for going back to news again and again was also information. What's happening where, are the lockdowns there? When are they getting lifted? What is the position? How are we, game? So news is something that kind of keeps you going all the time. To me, it just gets into it's a loop that keeps on happening. And at any given point in time, there is something or the other, whether it's in the form of information, whether it is in the form of any other content piece, that news is being, topping the charts, and especially during the pandemic. Now, if we come to the post-pandemic, and that was the time when, there were advertisers who were coming back, trying to get, advertise a bit on news, because there was no new programming on GCs, and news was something where, again, with a thought to say, should I advertise, should I not advertise? Will they buy my product? Depending on the category that I'm during this pandemic time, when nobody's, obviously, going out of their households also. But yet news became, to that extent, a genre of liking, a genre of preference, a genre that brought a lot of advantage to the advertisers at that point in time, because the eyeballs were there. apart from the OTT platforms, I think the eyeballs were also on the news genres. So it has had its fair share of pull and push, I must say, because I remember that when we used to work on automobile brand, the trade used to, or even various other categories, news was always taken a lot for trade guys, because they would push the advertiser to get the channel on board. So it's always been a combination of pull and push as far as media planning is concerned. And we used to always say that across news channels, there is a lot of flirting that happens, because there's no loyalty to one channel per se. You have a top set of channels in your mind, whether it is the Hindi news or the English news, and you keep flirting for news amongst those. And of course, the anchors did play a good role, because there are people who like to listen to X anchor vis-a-vis Y anchor and stuff like that. But I think a combination of 2 to 3 good news channels would actually cover your audiences and your markets as far as the brand is concerned. Now, that is the perspective from a media planner's perspective. So it's always been a channel which we've seen for frequency, for some I'm not talking about a GEC comparative of reach, but of course reach, and especially to do with the trade, or with the tier 2, tier 3 towns as well, specifically talking about the Hindi news channels, because there is a stark difference between the audiences that come to a Hindi news channel or an English news channel. Now, coming to a brand side, and specifically Patanjali, I think Patanjali has been a pioneer of FMCG advertising on news channels. I don't think anybody over the years has used the news channels as effectively and impactfully as Patanjali as a brand is used, because whether you see the L bands, whether you see Astons, whether you see Stings, whether you see tags, you see sponsorships, I think we've really patronized the news channels, and rightfully so, because tier 2, tier 3 towns, and also the Hindi speaking belt, when I'm speaking of Hindi news channels, is where the unfortunately or fortunately the man in the house does tune in, and the family sits around as well. The man in the house also listens to news, maybe disseminates that information to the family, and that's how the exchange of information or dissemination of information happens. So for a FMCG brand to be using the news channel so effectively, I honestly, when I was not with Patanjali, also to me it was a case study, and I remember a few years back, we used to do the planning strategy for Patanjali, and that's when we came across all this. And that's talking about the regional or the Hindi specific news channels, because regional we know cater to those markets, and the basics of the choice of news channels remain the same, other than the market that it is catering to and the language that one is getting into. So as far as English news channels are concerned, obviously you have a premium audience that you're talking about. Yeah, because the reach of English news channels is largely in the metros. I'm not saying it doesn't percolate down, but largely in the metros, because that's the kind of audience a Times Now or a Republic or somebody is looking at it. I mean, if that was the scene, then Republic would not launch Republic Bharat, right? Or if the penetration of the English news genre was in the tier 2, tier 3 markets as well. So I think there's a decent balance from both perspectives. News has a role to play for sure. Whether you talk about frequency, because obviously if you look at the efficiencies, news channels bring in a lot of efficiency to your media plan. Yeah, and then of course the reach and the opportunity to see your advertising by repeated exposures is something that the news genres do bring to the table. And the second part, sorry guys, I'm taking time because I have two perspectives. Yeah.
Sure.
So
Sure.
also coming from the perspective of news channels now, whether it is the stuff on your television or the digital piece, because obviously during the pandemic, a lot of audiences also shifted to digital. I would fathom that during pandemic, a lot of audiences stayed with their television sets because they were home. And now that the mobility has happened, there is more audience which is going on to digital. But however, there are all kinds of audiences which would consume news both on your mobile phones as well as on television. Per se, the linear television that we are talking about. So I think there has to be a programming content differentiation, because there was one time when news became entertainment. So it became entertainment news. I'm not talking about entertainment news from a Bollywood perspective, but news which was, you would see news and say, what? I mean, it's so funny, yeah. It's just entertaining me. So on one side, I'm talking about me being entertained, but that, the essence of news genre got lost. So to my mind, I think across, genre, across channels, the content is something that differentiates them. And there are these interesting initiatives that news channels take along with brands or for social causes and stuff like that, which also makes a lot of difference. I think those are the differentiators, from a content perspective. And again, what I'm saying is no rocket science, whether it is any other genre or news genre. I think content and the way the content is presented is what makes a difference. Sorry, guys, I'm going to keep quiet now. So over to you, Ram and Amol.
No, that's a fantastic overview that you gave, of the entire news genre in India as of today. And I think that's a very great start that we have over here. So moving on to you, Amol. As Anita said, efficiencies, frequencies, reach, right? This is offered, and news is something, where there is always freshness. There is always something breaking somewhere, some developments happening somewhere. Even in the post-pandemic times, we've seen the Russia-Ukraine conflict, fuel prices, inflation going up, so much happening all around. So with this, like Anita touched upon it, the differentiation, the differentiation part has become very important. Coming back to the question about repositioning of news channels, differentiating the content part, even the look, even the the USPs of the channel. So how that works out, and what you as a media planner you look for, when you go in and you place your clients' ads over there. How do you look at it?
Yeah, so I think I pretty much agree with what Anita has said, and she's very nicely summarized all the 3 points which were supposed to be discussed. Only thing is, what I'll do is I'll also bring a perspective of a buyer. In addition to media planning, how do we look at the news genre as not only as from a planning perspective, but also from an investment perspective, which is the media buying perspective. And I will just touch upon very briefly on the evolution of the media genre, of the news genre, sorry. So earlier, when we used to plan and buy on the news genre, it used to be all about the number of spots, the visibility, and because entry into GEC was obviously very expensive. It is still expensive, and you could only buy a limited number of spots. While the reach was absolutely much faster than other genres, the number of spots actually were not very high. So news primarily was used as something to get visibility, to get number of spots, and also for categories which could not probably afford the entertainment genre, because the investment needed on the entertainment genre is very high, and we all know that, right? But today, when I look at it, many clients, traditional clients, even some of the FMCGs have slowly graduated to the news genre as a reach building genre, a very integral part of their media plans. And of course, like Anita said, it is also about reach and the same time frequency. That frequency, which obviously you cannot get on the other genres. News channels today, the news genre rather has become a very credible medium of advertising. So in every media plan, there is a certain amount of budget which is parked on the news genre, which probably was not there a few years back. So that's a very fundamental shift in the way planning and buying is looking at the news genre. We all know during COVID, the ratings jumped up, obviously, because the new entertainment genre did not have any fresh programming, and people obviously were scared and they wanted to know what's happening. And news genre was the only place of information available. So obviously the rating shot up. But after that, things got back to normal. Now we are seeing a steady, normalization of viewership across genres. Right? So coming from that perspective, I think the news genre today has become a very important genre of advertising from a planning and a buying perspective. Now coming to the content part, I think that is where a bit of a worry is been expressed by some of the brands, agencies handle. So for example, there are quite a few brands who say that, advertising on news channel probably is a bit toxic, because of the content shown in the news genre. And I don't want to get into the qualitative aspect of content because that's completely the prerogative of the channels here, the news channels here. But sometimes the perception is that, the content shown is probably too sensational. It is too, disruptive. It is too toxic for our brands to be on in. And I think that is a major area of focus the news channel should definitely look at, because otherwise they'll be restricting the number of brands entry into the genre, right? Even if you look at today, what's happening on the news genre, if you look at the top 5 or 10 categories, it's dominated by innerwear, cement, steel, plastics. FMCG, of course, is a big part. But BFSI, for example, very, very surprisingly, is not the top genre on the category. So again, coming back to the the toxicity part, maybe that's an outcome of the content which the news broadcasters show. And I also agree that it is sensational because every day new things are happening, especially in the political area, especially and we all know the kind of controversies which are going on today. But I think if some of the news channels can actually differentiate the content, it is impossible to ignore the Tehelkas of the world. I mean, they will go on, right? But at the same time, if you focus on showing pure play news per se, I think from that perspective it will help. For example, even when I, as a consumer, I am a huge consumer of news channels, and I sometimes struggle to watch news. All I see is, probably controversies and a lot of this high adrenaline stuff happening, which is important. But I think sometimes I struggle to watch what's happening around the globe, what's happening to the economy, what's happening to our India's trust in the global arena, for example. That is what I would like to see as a viewer. And a lot of my colleagues, a lot of my peers, friends, they all share the same opinion. So maybe it is time for the news channels to have a look at the kind of content they are showing. Again, I come back to the prerogative. It is completely left up to them. But as an advertiser, they have to make the news genre slightly more, amenable, slightly more friendlier in that perspective. But having said that, there are so many categories which are actually built their businesses on news channels. Like I said, cements, plastics, pipes, innerwear, the kind of B2B kind of communication. In fact, they have used news channels very, very effectively. In fact, Anita spoke about Patanjali, and I completely agree. There was a time when Patanjali was all over the place, and people probably used to question the brand strategy. But I said, why not? If they're getting the visibility, they're getting it through various means of communication, not only the 30-second commercial, but the actions, bags, innovations, news branding, weather brandings. I think that's a great way to communicate that way. So that's the third point. The fourth point is the current, the ratings which have come out. So after the 4-week rolling data, what we observe is some of the ratings have gone down. But I would not jump to conclusions too soon because it was an IPL period. So I would say maybe because of IPL, some of the viewership has gone down. And I think we need to wait for another probably 6 to 8 weeks for the actual data to come out. When the data stabilizes, and then we probably hopefully should come back to the weekly data like it was there earlier to get a clear picture of the rankings and also the ratings. I also read somewhere about it being perception led. But what's happening today is, especially compared to FMCG and the large brands, they are looking at cost efficiency of the genre as well. So it is not that you buy hundreds of spots and you get visibility and then go out. You're actually looking at building reach, obviously is there. So it has been the news genre cost comparison in terms of, say, CPRP, for example, is being compared to other genres as well. And we can't run away from it. And I see that philosophy or that way of media planning and buying only going to strengthen in the coming years. And the last point is, it is probably good and bad for the genre. Good for the genre is because that will lend consistency to the genre being included in all the media plans. But at the same time, sometimes it could lead to dropping off some channels because CPRP is not working out, from a cost perspective. But largely, I would not be too worried about this from the way I see it today. because I strongly believe in the news channel genre and the way it is adding up to the brand building process. And I'm quite positive about the future of the channels. So that's my perspective on the 3-4 points which we spoke about. Sorry, have I taken more time than Anita? I don't know.
No, that was an excellent observation. Actually, given the ratings, the really rush for ratings, and everyone, the moment BARC resumed releasing the ratings for news channels, everyone rushing
Sure.
to claim the #1 spot. So Ramsai, as a media planner, how do you look at all these claims that are made by channels, right? We are #1 on this, we are #2, we've on this particular day's coverage, we've, we get a plethora of these information. So as a news channel, as a media planner, how do you take these into consideration? Are your clients swayed by such claims? And when you are devising a media planning strategy where it involves news, right? So how exactly do you work out that strategy? What works for you when you go in for selecting a particular channel group, and when you convince your clients where to place their ads? How exactly, what works for you? What sways you towards this?
Yeah, thanks, Shanta, and it was a quite insightful words from Anita and Amol. I may be having a few things to add upon to it. So one is that we are the people in the trade. We know that what numbers matters to us. But when you look at from a consumer perspective, they don't know all these details. They are not aware who is #1, who is #2, who is #3. It doesn't work in their mind space. It's only the news. And it's again, when it comes to news are actually earlier meant for the key opinion leaders. It has a call to action. News is not just a fact of a piece of an information. It just you absorb it and you just park it aside. It doesn't work like that, right? And again, news as a medium is a serious environment, as Amol pointed it out. And any of the brand today want to be present to get into the tom of consumers, which is top of mind awareness of the consumer. When you are communicating at their highly concentrated pace of mode, the communication reaches to their call to action point is far effective than the communication which goes into a frivolous environment. So yes, of course, the numbers matters a lot. One cannot ignore the numbers. When I say that, okay, for a leading GC channel, I will follow number. For the news channel, I won't follow the number. None of the brands will accept to or believe to, by that point of view. It is not about convincing the client. It is about picking the right choice for the brand. And also news is again, I just echo the words that it is a credibility builder, where it has been built through over the years, again through a loyal audiences and the loyal consumers, again with the people, the editorial board that actually try to do those news offerings to the consumers, right? Again, news has got two varieties out here, as so-called, how I've actually categorized the news is, one is a news, which is your hardcore news, and the other one is news plus. News plus is where you will see that it is of infotainment is what I will call it out. And again, people wants to hear those information also. There are certain segment of people that wanted to hear about what is happening in so and so person's celebrities life, and what is happening in so and so country. That's where it actually distinguishes. I've actually gone through some of the data, and I've just did some analysis on the pure news bulletin per se. Any news channel can afford to put only 27 to 32% of hardcore news. Other than that, everything has to be a news plus, or it has to be a repeat news, because we can only churn only that much of news in a day in our country, though India is a newsy country. Actually, we churn close to, I was having a chat with one of the leading publication editorial head and he is of opinion that about more than a lakh of news being churned in India every day, which are all actually one or the other way related to the consumer and the brand where actually can capitalize. So when you actually work into the brand planning side, when I put the news as a part of my, even I work on new business development also, and planning also, buying also. When we actually recommend it, we actually take this qualitative aspects into a consideration. And just to give you a small example, why I say this qualitative aspects is that 17 months we had no reporting happening, right? There are about 470 million secondages have been burnt over a period of last 2 months. I'm just taking the average of last 2 months. When you look at that data non-availability period, again, the secondages were burnt were similar to that. I won't comment on pricing here. I'm damn sure that the pricing doesn't see a drastic change. There may be, 5% plus or minus. That's always, acceptable. And also you look at the brand base. I'm not going by the advertisers, because every single brand behaves like an individual advertiser today, because they want their own pound of flesh, right? So from a brand base also, what I've observed is that during the data dark period, I won't call it as a data dark period, data non-availability period, there were about close to 3,300 brands have advertised over a period of 2 months time. I've taken a specific period. I will give you the period also. And I've looked at after, the data being released, that number has actually gone up a bit. What it actually tells that news is a qualitative call. It is not purely aided by, it is not only aided by numbers, is what actually the advertisers of believe. There are few advertisers in my own set of clients where I operate, Nestle and Parle and all. They've taken a cautious call to be away from news. That call is maybe based on the budget optimization, or for that matter, based on the so much of negative news. News is a news, right? You can't make a good news out of a bad news, right? So they've taken a call. That is a conscious call that they wanted to stay away from the news as a genre. So I think these are the few points that, what I've actually observed over a period of time when I was interacting with my clients. But they actually want to have, most of the advertisers brands wants to have news as an integral part of, as Amol said, integral part of their plan to build that credibility for the brand over the years, what they have been, proving per se.
Right. Thanks, Ramsai. Anita, you had touched upon it when you spoke earlier about, English news channels and Hindi, as well as the regional news channels. Now, you had definitely rightly mentioned, how perception works here, how, English news channels, they cater to a premium metro-centric audience base, and how Hindi channels and regional channels, they cater to more of a tier 2, tier 3 basis. Now, during the period where BARC was not releasing data about news channels, so we saw a lot of these regional news channels specifically saying that they are losing out extensively on the advertiser ad spends on that, and they fear that they might have to shut operations and all. So how exactly can these regional news channels compete for the advertiser ad spends part of it, when, as Ramsai said, that probably numbers don't matter so much? So how they can look at having greater advertiser pull? What should their strategy be?
So, Shanta, honestly, if you ask me, I don't think the regional news channels need to compete with Hindi or English. They just don't need to, because it is a question of the market that they are operating in, and the potential in that market, and the advertisers in that market. Apart from, of course, the national, all the brands which operate on a national level, for whom the regional markets become important, they are one set of brands that will advertise on them. And then there is a lot of regional retail, etc., and homegrown regional clients that also advertise on those regional channels. So honestly, they just don't need to compete. with English or Hindi, to the best of my understanding, because what they bring to the fore is really the credible news in that particular region that they're operating in the language of the viewer who's part of that region. So within the news, regional news channels, if there are 2-3, then of course, again, as Ram and Amol have mentioned, credibility comes into play, sensationalism comes into play. I think anchors have a lot of pull that come into play. They're influencers today, that comes into play. What is it that you are prioritizing in terms of disseminating the information, from a news perspective, that comes into play? Honestly, if you ask me, I would not go by ratings of news channels. They almost behave, for the lack of another analogy, they almost behave like your infotainment channels, where ratings don't matter but content matter. So that is very important. I remember in yesteryears we used to say, oh, X channel, an infotainment channel is 0.1, next month it's become 0.2, 100% increase, from a ratings perspective, but the base is so small. So I think to me, again, there are two things that really will attract, whether it's a regional channel, whether it is a Hindi channel, or whether it is an English channel. I think I will put content foremost. Yeah, because you have to understand, English news channels carry a different kind of content, sensationalize it in a very different way as compared to a Hindi news channel, which again, sensationalize, does the sensation part in a very, very different perspective. And I don't blame them, because they're catering to different kind of audiences. So I think content, to my mind, is something that plays a big role in terms of how you are getting the viewer to view your channel, and hence, of course, if the viewer is viewing, finally advertisers want eyeballs, right? So that's where you're coming from. So differentiation in content is something which is going to really help the news channels. I'm not talking about negative news, positive news, good content, bad content, because they're all subjective. For Russia, Ukraine, something which is happening in Ukraine is positive news. For Ukraine, it works the other way around. So I don't think we are really people who can really differentiate between that. But I think the way the content is really, proposed to the audiences, or the way it is disseminated, is what is very, very important. And each channel has its own role to play, for the simple reason that it has a different content, for the simple reason it's catering different kind of audiences. There are Hindi news channels who do well in certain pockets in the Hindi speaking markets. They don't do well in another markets. Of course, the English news channels have the all India perspective of the metros, and the very, very informed, Amol kind of serious person who's looking at news, and really hunting for news within the content pieces. Those are available. But then there is a large chunk of audience in the Hindi heartland, for example, who loves the sensationalization of news. That's where your eyeballs are coming from. Now, if you want the underwear, pipe, cement kind of guys, you figure out what your content is going to be. If you want the automobile, BFSI kind of guys, you figure out what your content needs to be. Because I think content today, goes without saying, drives viewership, whether it is GCs or whether it is anything, anything that you're viewing is being driven by content today. I mean, if I'm watching OTT today, it's only because of content, right? Nothing else. So content is driving that, and any brand, who is looking at who the audience of that content is, should actually synergize, across them, because you can't take all news channels. News channels are efficient, the frequency you get is huge there. So there is a lot of efficiency. I'm not talking about CPRPs on news channels at all. I'm not talking about ratings on news channels at all. Everybody is number one today, in their own bit. The Russia-Ukraine news, I was number one because my viewership was too big. XYZ, yesterday that Sidhu Musa thing happened, so maybe one channel is saying, and it's sad that you're actually divesting on these kind of events to see that who was the top viewed channel. But honestly, content, viewers, audiences, and of course the region is, to me, three very, very important things that should go into taking on how you want to really advertise on a news channel, irrespective of the brand.
Right. Thanks, Anita. Amol, now you had touched upon it briefly, but we are not really getting into the details of it. Sensationalism works. That's what viewers want to watch. Of course, on the other hand, we have serious news viewers, but ultimately news channels will be looking for garnering those eyeballs, drawing in those eyeballs, right? And we've seen, I'm not going to name any channels over here, a lot of toxic content making their way, especially during the news hour debates and all, right? And we've also seen viewership going up. We've seen advertisers getting onto it, but there have been instances where, certain advertisers also pulled away from a particular channel, right? Because of that toxicity of content. So, I mean, it's kind of a paradox over here. You draw in the viewership, but you're losing out on the advertisers here. So, what works exactly? How do you deal with that?
See, as I said earlier, that sensationalism, breaking news, tehelka will continue. And it is not relevant to our market. If you look at the global paradigm, it's the same. I mean, you look at the news channels in the US or in Europe, I think probably in the US, it's much more than us, in terms of sensationalism. So I think that will stay. That is not going to go away. Right. And I'm not talking about something going back to the DD kind of news, where a news anchor just reading it out. So that is not going to happen. We all know that. But the point was, there has to be the point was, how do you make more brands come on the genre? Some brands, as we all know, are kind of moving away from the genre because of the toxicity of the content, etc. So how do you bring them back? So I think there needs to be a balance between sensational news and actually pure play news, which the purist wants to watch. What will happen if they do that? We don't know. Maybe the ratings will go up. Maybe the time spent will go up. Maybe the ratings will go down. We don't know that. But I think some channels have to start experimenting on this. For example, news debate in prime time cannot be 2 hours. Because in metros, you get an hour or two to unwind and relax and look at channels. So if you are showing news debates for 2 hours in prime time, where is the time left for news? So it's gone to that extent where they need to think about, it's their business model. If they want more relevant categories, sustainable categories, big categories and big brands to be consistently available on the news genre, then probably this is one of the ways they can look at it. And also, sorry to digress a bit, I think the earlier point you made to Anita was about regionalization and how regional channels, news channels have come up and some of them are. I am actually surprised to hear it because I think the expansion of news will happen because of regional news channels. Anita pointed out to the content. For example, a Hindi news channel cannot show the content of a regional, of what's happened in the particular region, right? For example, I'm a huge consumer of regional news channels as well. I look at all the Maharashtrian news channels available, and the content there is very, very different from what a Hindi news channel is showing. So I think regional channels, regional news channels, probably, in fact, if you look at all major publication groups, they have all launched news channels because obviously entertainment game is very different, right? But regional news is very, very relevant because it complements the print business of that particular publication. So to expand the market, I think relevant content is extremely essential to expand the market. And I'm talking about advertiser-based regional news channels play a very, very significant role. Why should a local guy operating in Maharashtra and Karnataka spend his money on a Hindi news channel? It is a complete waste, isn't it? In fact, I was coming back to the question which was asked that how do channels increase business for that matter? So regionalization, geographical targeting, for example, some of the brands are looking at targeting only a specific geographies. And if one news channel can actually do it, have a relevant communication for that market, there are technologies available. For example, the split beams, what we call, which are already happening. So why can't news channels do it? So these are some of the way I think news channels can augment their advertiser base, and actually in the long run, it will be beneficial to them. Now that's my personal view. But again, having said that, somebody has to experiment and see whether it is actually working or not. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Amol. Ramsai, would you like to add to that as to how regional news channels, because we saw during the pandemic times when BARC data was not available, especially the News Broadcasters Federation, which has got a lot of regional channels, in that body. And they, in fact, had serious concerns that, we are not getting enough advertisers because we don't have any ratings available during this period. So how do you, what is your take on how regional news broadcasters can grow their base, and also the role that digital can play in, taking that base further? I'm sorry, I mean, we have not much time, so if you could be a bit succinct.
I'll finish. Yeah. Do I have three to 4 minutes?
Sure. No, more than that.
Great. So there are two questions you have asked. One is that how is that the digital penetration is going to boost up the space, and the second one is how the regional. Players are going to actually address their revenue problems, right? So I first of all, the market is completely now getting fragmented. That's the first thing one has to admit and understand, because of the ways of targetings have changed now. So every brand wants to actually, as Amol said, sharp targeting has become the key to success now, because every brand has only that much of time to build their quick awareness and reach to get the ROI for the investment that has been made on the space that they are operating, right? Because the availability of time has shrunken. Unlike Honor those days where I launch a brand, I say that, okay, fine, after 6 months, I will get a return back. That's not the case today. That's one. And second is, okay, fine. When we look at the metro and the tier one town per se, the penetration has actually reached to a certain saturation level. The growth and the expansion only can come through the regionalization. So that's where, what we actually call it as India is into two parts. One is India, what we call it as, the other one is a Bharat. Bharat is what actually, we address for our brands, which is called Rurban, which is rural urban, is what we actually, termed it, which is in a way, it is a middle India, where you're urban and rural. In between, there is a decent size of audience and consumer who is setting and who has not been actually, targeted in an effective manner. There are spillovers which is going and reaching into them, which is not giving the enough returns to the brand to grow into their, market space, right? That's where the regional channel comes into play. Now, if you look at the corporate advertising to retail advertising, the corporate advertising typically follows the aided decision making. When I say aided decision making, is numbers, something to substantiate why I have actually considered the so-and-so channel into my plan. It cannot be subjective. It has to be a qualitative fact that has to be put forward, because of the fact every business is now comes under audit also, right? And you have an auditor, internal, external auditor, who question them. This is all about the corporate phenomena. When you actually look into the regional phenomena, I'll not call it as rural. The regional phenomena is something, it works differently. It is a word of mouth advocacy. And I typically I come from a state which is Pondicherry. It's a Tamil Nadu, part of Tamil Nadu, right? Where the retail advertising is huge, right? It is perhaps it's one of the second largest retail advertising state in the country today, right? There, I happen to meet up with a lot of the sari owners and the chicken. There is a branded chicken in Tamil Nadu, right? Suguna chicken, where you don't find that anywhere in the world today. They've created it like that. So why I say that, those people doesn't look into the numbers. They look into the reality on the ground. They put investment on the channel and they see how many people are actually talking about it. They take physical surveys. When people visit them, when people talk to them, they say that, where have you seen me? Where have you seen my communication? Or somebody actually sends a message. That's how the peer-to-peer communication is actually plays a very, 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 very key role in the regional markets. And the corporate advertising continue to happen. The regional advertising have actually increased. If you look at the retail market, I was part of a retail forum of one of the retail forum last month, where we've very clearly seen that every 60 to 70 kilometer in India, the dialect changes, right? And you need to, as Amol and Anita said, that you need to address them with their local perspective. That's where this regional channel comes into an effective play. So I don't think so that the regional broadcast, it's my view of opinion that they have to worry too much about, numbers and all those things. They just have to keep this momentum at the local level, and they just have to keep proving it to them, as Anita said, offer what consumer wants to watch. Don't force them to watch something that, national television is doing, or somebody in the upcountry, they are doing something. You don't have to bring and dub it and put it over here. Just be with them, along with them, amongst one of them. That is where the success lies for the regional channels. And the digital space, if I have to tell you today, if you look at the top 10 regional news consumption on online, the top 8 are the regional. That's the data says. Okay, fine. In fact, I happened to read this one of the AdGully report only, where it was in association with the FICCI, if I'm right. So today you have close to 475 million people who actually are the online news consumers, which is more than 60% of your total internet consumers today. So there is a clear space to take the news to a different level with the personalized way of addressing the audiences. That's another opportunity for the brands to capitalize today. People used to solve for the cookies earlier days. Now you can actually solve for the real human beings. You actually do the personalized, because today every company has their own ways and means to get the PI data, right? And they've started using those PI data to do customize the communication. Who are their audience? They know the audiences also. That's where the sharp targeting and completely negating the spill, the online news and the online news consumption is going to actually help the brands.
Right. Thank you, Ramsai, and thank you, Anita. Thank you, Amol, as well, for those insights. I mean, this is a topic, where we could go on and on. In fact, there are so many aspects that we are to touch.
I was wondering that this topic is too huge to
too huge. Exactly. We could probably have an entire day conference over it, because there's so much to cover in it. Maybe we can look for it in some other forum, but we can definitely have a series of industry reports also, where you as media planners, Anita, you also as a brand head, how we can cover this in a more in-depth way. So we'll
Shanta,
definitely
in fact,
be in
we've
touch.
not really touched upon the digital piece as much.
Absolutely.
Because that's
absolutely.
that is something that will bring a lot of semblance, as well as expansion opportunities. So I think that should be another topic of discussion, because
Sure.
There's a lot.
I think it's good that Ramsai touched upon it, because digital now is will be the focus area going ahead anyway. So
absolutely. In fact, we can look forward to an industry story where we can carry forward this into the digital aspects of it. So definitely we'll be in touch with you, and thank you so much for your time specifically.
Just one sorry interruption.
Yeah, sure. No, sure.
Sorry, one interruption. It is not only media planning, it is also media buying as well.
Media buying as well.
So I think both complement each other and both are equally important. So
absolutely,
Amol's investment DNA is coming into play.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Shanta, and thanks,
thank
Ram.
So
thanks, Amol, for
thanks
your time.
Thank you
for your time and your insights.
But that's one thing is for sure, that news is going to be here, and they are addressing the most serious voting audience. They are the people who actually choose their leader, right? That's what the responsibility of news channel is, to keep that hygiene intact, is what I keep.
And largely on the digital channels.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Young voting audience on digital channels. So I like Shanta said we can go on and on, but thank you so much for the time.
Very important. Thanks. Yeah, thanks.
That's the headway for 2024, I guess. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Ramsai.
Thanks.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shanta ma'am, and thank you, panelists. And now, ladies and gentlemen, comes the moment we all have been waiting for. We now officially launch Trending Now 2022. Can we have the AV, please? Thank you everyone for joining us today, and stay tuned for Imagex 2022, our first physical event after the pandemic on 16th June at Leela Ambience, Gurgaon. See you all there.